have to have things adjacent on other sites or maybe across the street or whatever. But again, the simple answer to your question is yes, by all means. We need to mix up things. That's what Jacobs was pushing for.
Yeah.
She, as you remember, I'm sure she spent her time when she was writing that book in Greenwich Village in New York. And Greenwich Village at that time, and I haven't been there really for many years, but I mean, it was a neighborhood pretty much, or a series of neighborhoods pretty much like what you have around Rittenhouse Square.
And how do you feel about the smaller homes that are being constructed for the Philadelphia Housing Authority compared to what it used to be, where the big apartments?
Mixed feelings about it. A lot of these neighborhoods that I've seen, just riding around, look to me as if they're lifted out of a suburban playbook, which may not be all entirely bad. I'm not a personal fan of suburbia for a number of reasons, but that's a different set of issues.
Right.
We need to build, in a design context, within the neighborhood environment, we need to build, I think, housing units that are going to be more complementary in a city context rather than a suburban context. So I have real mixed feelings about what I see.
Okay.
Sometimes I like it. Sometimes I'm not so sure. Sometimes I don't like it.
I guess the negative effects of these smaller homes that it takes up more land.
Exactly. That's exactly right. They do. They're more land consuming. They have a bigger footprint per capita. We're hearing, we're being bombarded all the time today. We got to reduce the footprint. Well, if you're going to reduce the housing footprint, the way to do it, of course, is to build higher density housing. More people per square block. But then again, that opens up another set of questions. How high do you want the high rise to be? And will the high rise, fit into to your earlier question? How are you going to mix the uses within the high rise? Can that be done? So
the amount of space that's available in a single home in a high rise is very limited too.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of these situations you have with redevelopment, particularly in cities, cities like the size of Philadelphia,
right.
You're always going to be dealing with two-edged swords.
Do you have any of your personal opinions about the city of Philadelphia itself?
I love Philadelphia. I love Philadelphia. I think it's a great city. All cities have their issues, their problems, their negatives. You can find them anywhere. You can find them in small towns and small cities. But I think Philadelphia is a great city. It's a vibrant city. It's got wonderful schools of higher learning. It's got a great transportation system most of the time.
Yeah. And then the problem we see here today is that we see more and more homes being built in the suburban areas, and people are moving out into those areas and moving away from the city. Is this a long-term problem or just a short-term?
Well, I think trends go up and down. There was the great, white flight, as it's been referred to by the sociologists, beginning, probably in the late 50s, early 60s, or maybe early 50s through early 60s in that decade, where a lot of, the old, especially ethnic groups that had migrated from, other places and lived in the city because that was the cheapest place for them to live, the place where they worked. You had a pretty large scale of manufacturing base, and then of course when that all took off, places began to establish in the suburbs, and then of course another series of social, racial issues emerged in the 60s, and then people, they just took off. But I think we've seen reverse trends. I think we've seen some gentrification in a lot of places in Philadelphia, as you have in a lot of cities. They brought people from the suburbs back.
Jake was present today. What do you think she would say about the city of Philadelphia and how it goes by everything that she said?
Well, I think generally speaking, she'd probably find some fault somewhere because she had a pretty critical eye. But I think generally speaking, I think she'd be complimentary. Again, you got to remember that the time frame that she was writing, you had in New York, you had Robert Moses, who was putting up a tremendous highway system and tunnel system in the New York area, and they were demolishing neighborhoods, like you squash a mosquito. You had the modernist movement was, in its prime, and architects like Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe and a bunch of these other characters running around, designing high-rise shoeboxes that they thought was the complete living environment that was desirable. So she was really pissed off at a lot of things that were happening, and she blamed planners for it. She said the planners have been part of this whole movement. And I think to a great degree she was right. And of course, urban renewal, she was very upset. But anyway, we've seen things change because we've learned some lessons. And I think, generally speaking, I think she, to hit your question, as I said, I think she'd be pleased, but she'd find something to be bitching about.
So our more modern, city and community regional planning professions and people, moving towards more conservative and bringing more diversity into one area.
Oh, absolutely. Even in suburban areas. This whole movement known as New Urbanism. You're familiar with that?
No.
Well, you gotta know that. This whole movement of New Urbanism is talking about creating communities just as you're describing.
Okay.
Not just diverse land uses, but diverse socially and economically. And the revitalization of small towns, medium-sized towns, a lot of communities that have lost population. You've been in I'm sure, many smaller communities, and you drive down the Main Street and you say, boy, this is so charming. It's such a delightful place. Why are all these vacancies here? Why are so many stores out of business? So a lot of the New Urbanism movement is trying to reverse those trends. And it will impact center cities, large cities like Philadelphia. It's an exciting time to be in planning and design because, again, there are a lot of experiments being undertaken. There are a lot of innovations being cooked up. We have learned some hard lessons, and we're trying to ameliorate the problems that those problems and issues have given us.
Yeah, that's great. I had a great time, and answers were wonderful. And
Good.
thank you so much.